here in 1940.
And where was that?
Where was it? It was in Dublin, Ireland.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a place called Fownes Street, which is in the heart of Dublin.
And what's your earliest memories of
Earliest
that
memories
time?
of that time was I must be probably around 4 years of age, when I was running in and out of my grandmother's kitchen, and I was stopped to have a look at my granddad cleaning his shoes with the polish, and I was going to put my finger in the polish tin, and I got wrapped over the knuckles with the brush.
Right.
Don't touch that. That's one little memory.
I was born in Hollis Street Hospital, Dublin, the 18th of the 4th, 1940.
And what's some of your what's an early memory for you?
An early memory of me would be my mother walking my younger sister in the pram along the canal in a place called Percy Place off Bagot Street, and I was walking along beside her, and my dad was swimming from one bridge to the next, and I was so upset because I thought he would drown.
Oh.
That's a huge memory.
What were your parents' names?
My parents' names was Andrew, my father, and Maureen, my mother. She was a seamstress in a clothing factory. My father was a musician in the Irish Army Band. From the tender age of 14 years of age, he went into the Army School of Music and became a musician throughout his whole life. That was his whole career, right till the age of 67. Yeah, 67.
And how did they meet?
How did they meet? All through dances. When the army guys would be out playing their music after hours from the band, my mother would be going to these dances that he'd be playing at, and that's how they eye to eye.
And what were your parents' names?
Mary and Paddy.
And what did they do for a living?
My daddy was a bus conductor and my mother was a housewife. That's it.
And how did they meet?
They met because my dad used to drink frequently, and the pub he went to, my uncle worked in. He was a publican, and he got to know my dad, and after his stepfather had thrown him out because of his drink, and my Uncle Paddy took him home to my grandmother's, and he lived there for a while. He lodged there, still working on the buses, spick and span, and very quiet. And that's how he met my mother. And he got okay with the drink, he got a little bit more sensible, and they married.
My grandparents was on my nana, who was Florence Dixon, and my grandfather was Jim Dixon. That's on my mother's side. On my father's side, it was Andrew Tighe and Dora Tighe. My grandfather on my dad's side, he worked in the railways, but he was also a part-time entertainer, entertaining in small clubs and pubs doing tap dancing, singing, doing monologues and that kind of thing. As was my mother, my grandmother. She did similar, but she was very ambitious. She wanted to travel and leave Ireland and do her thing in England. And that's what happened. She decided to up and go, and the grandfather wouldn't entertain that, so he stayed, and she went, and they kind of parted in that way. She wasn't very successful in England, so she ended up going to Canada. In Canada she'd done very well, and she met up with this other guy who was in the entertaining business, but he also had a big job in the Canadian Railways. He was quite high up in that field, but he was a magician, and they used to do their acts together. She'd be his partner, and over many years they entertained together until my grandfather, when he died, then they married.
My grandparents was Tom Kelly from a small town in Ireland called Hackettstown, County Carlow, and my grandmother was Rose Fallon from also a small town called Kilbeggan in Westmeath, Ireland. And they met when my grandmother worked in the convent. She used to make lace, and my grandfather was the baker, and he used to deliver the bread. So that's how they met, and they got married and went to live in Dublin, and my grandfather was called up to fight in the First World War in France, and he had to go away, so my grandmother had to live on her own. By this time she had a few children, and yes.
And did your grandfather give you any funny stories?
My grandfather gave me great stories about the war.
Yeah.
He gave me stories about when he was in the trenches, and his friend or his mate beside him used to share a pipe. And one day, his mate was shell shot, I think they call it, and his head was just cut off. And at this time, the friend had the pipe in his mouth, so the head was on the ground, and the head took 3 pulls out of the pipe. And I said to my granddad, "And what did you do?" And he said he took the pipe out of his mouth, and he had a pull of the pipe himself. So whether that was true or not, I don't know.
How many brothers and sisters did you have in the family? What were their names?
I had 4 brothers and 1 sister. The sister being the eldest. You want the names?
Yeah.
The sister being Dolores, as she liked to be called. Then there was my elder brother Raymond. Then there was myself. There was my one down from me was Jim, and then Desmond and Noel. We did have a 7th child, but died at birth.
I had 4 sisters and myself. 5 girls.
And their names?
Pat was my eldest sister. I was 2nd, Mary, and Ethna 3rd, Sylvia 4th, and Bernadette 5th.
Yeah, up to the age of 10, I lived in our grandparents' home, which was in the city, Dublin city, and we were there with aunts and uncles. It was quite a big gathering of family in
what did the building look like?
Yeah, it was it was a Georgian style house. We lived on and it was turned into accommodation apartments. We were on the very top one with my grandmother and grandfather. Well, the living conditions in Fownes Street, in my grandmother's, wasn't all that great. We used to have to sleep what they used to call
Head to toe.
Head to toe, top and tail. That was two at one end and two at the other end of a big double bed. So you can imagine the cramped conditions that was. And that was only one bed. There was another bed with similar bodies in it. And so there was that. There was always, like at meal times, there was sort of like you queue up to sit round the table because there were so many. There was the aunts and the uncles and so forth. And well, when you had a situation where you want to go to the toilet, depending on which one it was, number one or your number two. Number one was the wee wee, number two was the poo poo. If it was number one, the children were allowed the grandmother had this huge sink in the kitchen, and she had a curtain underneath the sink, which she kept a bucket in. Now, if it was number one that you needed to do, the children were allowed to have a piddle in this bucket. And of course, when the bucket was full, it had to be carried down to the toilets, which was 3 flights of stairs down into the backyard. If it was number two, you had to go down 3 flights of stairs and out to the toilets, the open backyard toilets. Of course, it was always an argument over whose turn it was to carry the full bucket of wee to empty it out in the toilet. But that was part of life in those days. And when you went down to do your number two, in those days there was no such thing as rolled toilet paper. So we were given, if there wasn't any paper which happened to be newspaper, we were given a newspaper, and while we were doing our business, we would be cutting little squares out of this newspaper to put onto a needle and string. And we just filled up this string with these square pieces of newspaper, and that was our toilet paper. And of course, being kids, getting up into Dublin, we used to, because we were perhaps bored, just doing our thing, we would tear off a piece of the newspaper and roll it up, and we always had to have a candle when it was in the evening time, when it became dark, to go down, because we didn't have electric lighting. We went down to do our thing, and we had to bring this candle. So while we had the candle, we would roll this newspaper up and turn it into a cigarette. We'd get a couple of strips of it and make it nice and tight, and we'd end up smoking it, thinking it was a cigarette.
Well, when I was a child at school, and I was late for the rosary one morning, the nun put me outside the door and continued with the rosary and said she would talk to me on the way out. So the rosary was over and everyone came out, and she came to me and she said to me, you know it's 9 o'clock, you Churchtown tribe, which was Anne, myself, and another girl called Mamie Connolty, and she said we were always late. So she said, you can go down now to baby, first year, like the baby's class downstairs, and you can spend a week there. And I said, well, you might as well give me my transfer to another school, because what's the point of me coming to school and going down to babies? So of course she was very annoyed with me then. So she said, stay there and I'll be back in a minute. So off she went. So off I went down the stairs and out the convent way and down to my granddad in the cobbler shop. And I wouldn't go back to the school. So, but next morning my granddad took me back to the school, and I got punished. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we had one of my uncles, my uncle Leo. my namesake, he was a watchmaker in one of the prominent jeweller shops in Dublin. We also had his own private little workshop in my grandmother's small little room that only he had a key to it. He used to, when he was in there, he'd lock the door, doing the work on these watches, and when he wasn't there, when he was at his job, the door would also be locked, so the kids couldn't get in and out and upset his little domain. But every now and then he'd let us come in and to have a look at what he was doing. And of course it was just a matter of that we couldn't touch anything. So those are little memories of that time.
So yeah, so tell us about the time.
The time, that was a time when one of my aunties worked in a building not too far from where we lived. And every now and then we would pop round to see her at lunchtime, and we'd have a chat with her and talk to her and so on, and maybe bring her down something. My grandmother would give us something to give to her for her lunch, so that would be one of the reasons we'd go and have a chat with her. This particular day, they have these great big, what would you call them? These doors. These particular doors had a smaller pedestrian door, so that you didn't have to open up just to walk in and out. You could just open this pedestrian door and step over the step, and in you went. So I was probably only about, I think I was about 8 or 9 at the time. I was able to stand in the framework of this little pedestrian door. And one particular day I was doing this and chatting to my aunt, and somebody was coming out to go out. So in my movement to get out of the thing to let her through, I slipped, put my hand down to save myself, and broke my arm. So that was the occasion. I remember being carted back into the place, and somebody said, "Oh, you have to get him to the hospital." So they put me into a car and drove me to the local hospital. In the meantime, somebody had gone up to tell my mother, which was only literally 5 minutes up the road, and she come down, went straight to the hospital, and from there I had my arm fixed up. And oh no, it didn't really. The hospital that we went to wasn't a children's hospital, so all they could do was put what do you call them, wooden splints. Put splints on my arm, and they said, "We'll get you an ambulance and take you over to the children's hospital." But in those days, ambulances were few and far between, and we were waiting and waiting and waiting. And my mum said, "Well, look, we'll see if we can get a bus." So we'll walk up, because we knew where it was, and it wasn't probably about a half an hour walk, which we ended up doing. So I'm walking all the way up to this children's hospital with a broken arm in splints, until I got to the children's hospital, and there they'd done the job, put me out, and put my arm in plaster of Paris.
This is my claim to fame. When I was a child and lived with my grandparents on Churchtown Road, at the top of the hill, Maureen O'Hara had lived previously, but was now living in America, as she's a film star, and we heard she was home on holiday. So my cousins and I were down at the dropping well for an ice cream, and on the way back I decided maybe it would be a good idea to knock on the door and ask if we could see Maureen. So we opened the gates, went in, rang the bell, and Mrs. Fitzsimons, her mother, came out. And of course we would have been familiar to her, because her husband and herself would be in the garden every morning when we walked to school. And they always said hello to us and so on. So we weren't strange to Mrs. Fitzsimons. So I said, "Oh, please, could we see Maureen? We heard she's home on holiday and we'd love to see her." So she said, "Well, hold on a second and I'll see if she's not busy. So anyway, a few seconds went by and next thing Maureen appeared, and I can still see her so clear because she had a red and white striped dress. We went on to chat to her, and she asked where we lived and told her just up the road, and she asked us about school and said how she went to that school, and one of the teachers, Miss O'Gorman, who was there when she went, was actually still at that school and taught us.
When my father was posted down to a place called Athlone, right in the centre of Ireland, so he was posted down there and we all moved down to Athlone for, I think it was 4 years, and I have sort of few and fond memories of that place. Oh yeah, well, we had great fun because we were living in married quarters, what they call married quarters. The army provided housing for us, and got up to all sorts of mischief. Like they had these missing huts, which were up off the ground. They were like wooden huts that were built up probably about 2 feet off the ground, and we used to play hide and seek under there. And when we knew we had to go in, we getting called to go in for our tea and go to bed, we didn't want to, so we would hide under these, and they had to come out searching for us, and they kind of knew where we were, but we were, being small, we were able to go from one hut to the next and so on. And then of course during the winter time we had great snowball fights. We used to, all the kids would get together, and we had this, it was a 2-story building that we were in. There was a veranda on just above where we were, and we would go up onto the veranda and make up all the snowballs, waiting for all the dads coming back from the music, because they would be there from 9 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, practicing music and playing music and so. And we'd be waiting and hiding up in this veranda. And when they'd all come around the corner, we'd let them have it. And it was great fun. They would throw snowballs back up at us and we'd snowballs at them. So that was great fun. And then Christmas time we had visits from my aunts and uncles from Dublin coming down for Christmas, and we got out the fireworks, which were in those days were allowed. They're now banned throughout Ireland, but in those days you could buy these fireworks, and we had great Christmas fun. Greystones, a place called Greystones, which was just the next train stop from Bray, and my dad was able to hire this house, which was a solitary house on the beach. He knew somebody who owned this house, and he rented it out for the school holidays, which was sort of 6 weeks, and that was unbelievable. That was really good fun down there. You know, again, as kids, we were up to all sorts of mischief, and of course my dad still had to go back to the city to do his work in the barracks with the music, but every day he'd come back out on the train, and the train just ran behind the house, probably about 50 metres away. The railway line was running there, and as the train was going by, he'd be looking out the window waving to us, waiting to pull into the next station, which is great. And then we'd all run down to the station and pick him up and come back to the house. But one particular day we were there, we saw the fishing boats coming back in, back into the harbour, and one of them was heading towards our part of the beach. And we thought, what's up? Something's happened here, you know. And we saw then all of a sudden the nets that the guys were on the boat were holding on to. One of them had burst, and they had got a good catch. But and the quickest way was to try and save as many as they could, was to get to the beach. But then we were there, and we ended up getting pots and pans and basins, anything that would hold water, and we were able to help ourselves to as much fish as we wanted, which was great fun. Absolutely brilliant, you know. So that was a great day. That was great memory, you know. We used to on that particular, we used to have to, because this house didn't have running water, we had to go down to, it's only about 100 yards down the way, there was a what do you call it, a well, pumping well, and we'd have like a wheelbarrow type thing with a huge big tank on it, like a drum, and we'd roll it down and fill it up with the water from this pump, and then roll it back, and that's what we used to use for our water, you know, for cooking and whatnot. The toilet situation, there was a toilet, but and it was only fed. The system was only fed from the mains, but we didn't have mains in for drinking water and cooking. So,
Did you have any nicknames in those days?
Oh yeah. Well, but just when we eventually started school, I was a bit older, I was nicknamed Trigger. And that was only because I was always going on about a famous film star of that era, who was a cowboy by the name of Roy Rogers, and his horse was called Trigger, who could do tricks. You know, he was able to do it, and this Roy Rogers travelled around the world with Trigger, putting shows on, and you know, and it wasn't circus, that was actually in theatres. And I remember we went to actually see him when he came to Dublin, and I must have been going on so much about this horse that they ended up calling me Trigger.
So where did you go to school?
Well, as a very young child, what we used to call babies was down in a place called St. Michael's and John's, which was just down, not too far, 10 minutes from where we lived in Dublin. And then from when we eventually moved out of the city, out to Crumlin, I was 10 years of age. I went to the Christian Brothers School, which was only around the corner from where we lived. And that was from the year of 10 up to 14 years of age.
Yeah, what were your favourite subjects? Can you remember?
Didn't have any favourite subjects. Didn't like maths. Didn't like. We had a lot of religious stuff thrown at us in those days. Probably history was about the only thing that I liked. We used to do a lot of history stuff, and but not in Ireland. It was mainly world history, and that was a favourite.
Can you remember any teachers?
Any teachers?
Of your teachers?
I remember our Christian brother teacher. His name was Brother Brennan, and he was quite good, but very, very harsh in the way most of them were like this. They dealt with teaching in a different fashion that they do now. Yeah.
Is there anything you actually liked about school, or is there any fond memories?
No, fond memories of the schooling in the Christian Brothers was playing hurling. I used to love to play hurling, and I didn't call it gymnastics. They used to do. I can't remember what it's called, but we had these. The fellas who throw things. What do you call them?
Skittles,
Juggle.
Juggling. Those juggling things, like there's a grip, and then it goes out into it like a bat, only about that long. We used to have two, and we'd do to music, all different shapes and all that kind of stuff. We used to enjoy doing that. What we didn't like was I don't want to use the word punishment, but the
corporal punishment.
The corporal punishment that they used to dish out when you were either late for school, which you shouldn't be, but things happened that made you late.
And what did they do?
Well, the brothers used to have these leather straps, but it wasn't like a belt. It was a piece of leather that was probably about 18 inches long, quite thick, and we used to get slapped with that. And like the worst thing about them was when you did something wrong, depending on the severity of the wrong that you did, you could get up to 6, 8, 10 slaps on the hands, and we always felt that they were aimed on your hand at certain parts across the thumb, which really hurt, or at the tips of your fingers, which really hurt. And if you for any reason you pulled away when it came down, you got an extra amount of slaps because you did that. So yeah.
What jobs have you done?
I've done everything.
What have you done?
I've worked in supermarkets, I've worked in newsagents, I've worked in a hospital, I've worked in a restaurant, and I've done a little bit of bar work when I worked in the restaurant, because it was a large place, so you helped out everywhere. So yeah, that was my favourite job.
Yeah. Mm. Why was it your favourite?
I worked there for 9 years, and I just felt it was like home, because I got so used to the work and the people, and yeah, it was nice. I made lots of friends.
And what was, in your time, what was the one, if you were look back on jobs, what would be the one that you went, oh, I didn't like that, it was too hard, or it was tough, or it was...
Oh, well, when I went back to Ireland one time, and now my children were grown up, so I decided I'd have to get, we were between houses at the time, and I thought I'll get a little job. So I went to this factory in Tighe, and I got this job, and it was soldering, something I had never done in my life. And so I thought, oh, it's okay, it's only 4 hours in the evening, and you know, it's money and so on. And I went, I had the interview, got the job, went in the first night to work in my lovely clean clothes and so on. And the guy came, he took me to my place of work, and then he said, oh, he went to this cupboard and took out this dirty apron. And I said, oh, could I not have a clean one? And he said, that's the only one we have at the moment. I said, well, I'm not putting that apron on. So he said, but it's the only one, well, I'm not putting that apron on, I said. So I said, is the manager around? And he said, yeah, I'll get him for you. So he came over. So I said to him, no, I'm not putting that apron on. I'm a new worker. You should have an apron for me. So anyway, he said, sorry, no, I haven't. I said, well, that's okay. Can you just show me the way out? So I just went home. So the next day, I was in the village in Tighe, and I met an old friend of mine who I had worked with in the sewing factory years ago. And I'm talking to her, and I said to her, wait till I tell you this, and I told her about the job, and she said, and who, I can't remember the name of it now, it was an electrical place anyway. Anyway, I said, I went for this job and told her the whole story. And she said, what was the manager's name? And I told her his name. She said, that's my husband. So we had a great laugh over it. And she said, when I go home tomorrow, when I go home tonight, she said, I'll give him what for.
My first job was commonly known as a grease monkey. And that was to do in those days, and I was only 14 years of age when I took on this job in a garage. And I used to, in those days, the cars, when they were built, they had these, what they call grease nipples on all the joints. You know, the steering joints, the wheels, the axles, and you had to grease them. They had to be, you know, when you come in for a service, these things had to be greased. You had to do the oil changes and the filter changes and all that kind of stuff. And you put the car on a ramp. You raised it up in the air and you did all that. You did change the oil and whatever. As I was only 14. I was dying to learn how to drive, so I used to take the odd chance with when the boss wasn't around to drive the car. It'd be only a few yards and back it up and drive it forward, back it up, drive it forward, and just kind of a practice thing. But I never really could take it out on the road because it wasn't insured. I hadn't got a license or nothing. So and as I got more proficient at it, the chances were getting more. I thought, well, I'll drive it up to where they park the cars, up the top of the garage up at, you know, this area where they used to park all the cars. And I was doing that for a while, but, you know, the boss was out, you know, he used to test cars, and he'd be out for quite a while. And when this particular day, I get myself ramp, and after finishing working on it, and I was taking it up to park it up in the car park, when as I'm driving up, who's coming in but the boss. He's had to come on back early than normal. He's normally out for about an hour and a half, but he was only about 15 minutes out. And I'm driving this car up, and he's driving in, and I could see him looking at me, but then he just carried on, and I put the car away and thought, oh my God, I'm in for it now, you know. So about half an hour later, I got called. The foreman of the garage came and said the boss wants to see it. And I said, oh, that's it, I've lost my job, you know. So anyway, I went to the boss, and his name was Mr. Gaffney. And what I remembered a lot about him was he only had one eye. He had two eyes, but he only had one eye. And when he'd be looking at you, it's like as if he's looking behind you. Right away. So he called me, and he says to me, looking at me, or looking behind me, he says, did I see you driving a car up there? I said, yeah. Yes, Mr. Gaffney. I said, he said, how long have you been doing that? And I said, oh, only a while. You know, I wanted to learn how to drive. He said, well, you're not supposed to do that. I should sack you. He said, well, anyway, I'm not going to sack you. But and he opened the till and took out a £1 note. He gave me the £1, and I think 2 shillings. That was to pay for the bus fare. He said, go in and get yourself a license. At least if you got a license, you're not breaking the law, you know. So that's what happened. He gave me this £1 note, and that's what it cost for a license, £1. And you were able to go in and say, I need a driving license, and they would just write out a ticket, sign it, stamp it, and you pay £1, and you've got your driver. You're a driver, you know. And
so what was the so what age were you when you worked in the hotel?
In the hotel, I was, let me say 40, 15, and probably about 16, yeah, 15 and a half, 16.
And what were you doing in the, what was
Well, I went in as a page boy, and I worked for a big hotel called the Hibernian Hotel in Dublin, and I was a page boy there for a few months when I was approached by one of the managers of the restaurant, asking me why wouldn't I train as a waiter. And so I did the page boy for a while, and then I decided, and of course it was a bit more money as well, and I changed over from being a page boy to a commie waiter. When I was in the hotel, now this is like after I started as a commie waiter. We used to do, in those days you were expected to work till all hours. There was no rules and regulations, so you know, you could be working till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning on a big function, which often happened. And anyway, this particular function that we were working on, when it finishes, you have to clear everything back down to the kitchens, and any foods that are left, any bowls of trifle, any bowls of fruit salads and stuff like that, all had to be returned. So where these kitchens were down, you had to go down these stone steps down into the kitchens. So I grabbed the trifle bowl, making sure there was a spoon in it, and on my way down I had a good look around. There's nobody, and I stood on the steps having a scoop of the trifle, and just getting it in as much as I could when I heard these steps of somebody coming down. And who was it but my manager, a man by the name of Mr. Fabrin. I always remember his name, and I thought, oh my God, I've lost my job, because he didn't do those type of things in those days. So he looked at me and he took the bowl out of my hand and carried on down the stairs with me, and he put the bowl up on a shelf, and he said, now when you finish your work you can come back down and have some more of that. And he let me off, you know. So that was good, you know.
What's your most memorable travel experience?
Oh, the one I would talk about was my first trip to England on the boat, with my ham sandwich wrapped in tin foil, and my note telling me what train to get when I got off the boat, and my changes on the way.
What age were you then?
I was 18.
Goodness. Well, the most memorable one was when I left home at the age of 18, and I was travelling on my own to the UK, which in those days we had to do it by ferry, or not by ferry, by boat, travelling from Dunleary to Holyhead, and my mum and dad taking me down to the docks to get on this boat, and that was a memory that always stuck with me, with my little case, and I'm going on this boat where I've never been on it before, and never been to the UK, and never been to England. So at 18 years of age I'm doing this, and I think, oh my God, am I going to, well, I had everything written out for me, what to do and what not to do, and so everything went well. Bit of common sense, just you got a mouth in your head, tongue in your head, you just ask questions if you get into strife, you know. Well, what it was, after leaving home, I'm moving to England to join up with my brother, my eldest brother Ray. We were both working in just outside of London, and we were there for probably about a year when there was times where pretty economically were starting to tighten in England, and the place that we worked for went to the wall, and everybody was laid off, as we were, and we started looking for work, and we didn't know how, you know, where to go and what to do. We were living with an aunt and uncle in a place called Epping, just outside London, and so we knew we couldn't be a hinder to them too long. So we were in a place called Ilford in London, and we had discussed this earlier, that should we go into the Air Force or the Army or what. And as we were walking along talking, we saw the big blue and white flag of the Air Force outside of a building. We thought, oh, these must be the offices, and so we did. We were right. We went in and asked what the story was, and they gave us the details, and they said, do you think you'd like to join? And we said, well, what do you, and we looked at each other and we said, what do you reckon? Yeah, let's go for it, you know. So we had to fill in a few forms, took it in the back room to test us out to see whether we could count up to 10 or we, you know, were able to write and spell and all that kind of stuff. And then told us, right, that we could join if we wanted to, but we had to go to a place called Cardington, which is in Bedfordshire, in 2 weeks' time. So they gave us travel warrants and told us to be at the station at a certain time, blah blah blah, and head off to Cardington. And we would spend a week in Cardington, which was an Air Force base, but it was I don't know what you'd call it, a place where you go in to check out the, you know, whether you like it or not. So anyway, 2 weeks' time, we got on the train, got to Bedfordshire, and were picked up at the station, taken to the Air Force base, and from there we had to do lots of paperwork and exams and medical. Medical was a big thing. We had to go through everything. We got so many needles put into us that week. We thought we were like pin cushions. But and after passing all of that, at the end of the week, we were even given uniforms to wear for that particular week. And of course we felt really like we were the bee's knees with the uniform and all that kind of thing. And but at the end of the week we had a choice to make whether we liked to actually join up or say no thank you, I don't think we will. But at the end of the week my brother and I decided with about 40 other guys that we wanted to join. We got posted to our training camps, which was just outside Manchester, which we had to go and spend 2 months training, and there was all sorts of stuff going on there, plus a lot of paperwork again and all that kind of thing. And then choices had to be made as to what you would like to be doing and how many years you would like to sign up for, and so on.
How many years did you sign up for?
We both signed up for 5 years, and when we finished our training, we were let go on 2 weeks leave. We went back home to spend a fortnight at home before we were sent to our permanent Air Force base. And it was then that we got split up. Ray was posted to a place in Buxton, Derbyshire, and I was posted to a place called Stafford in Staffordshire. And that was the last we saw of each other for a while, till we were able to get to meet each other at weekends and stuff like that. But I was only in 6 months when I got posted to Germany. And when I got to Germany, I went to a place called Larbruck.
What year was this?
And this was 1959. And I joined a fighter squadron. And that was really, I was out there for 2.5 years, and I was with that squadron. And we did all sorts of travelling in terms of different camps. The whole squadron would move to another camp 1,000 miles away, and we'd spend 6 months there, and then we'd move from there to another camp. And so I enjoyed the 2.5 years that I had out there, and then eventually got posted back to the UK. And from there I joined this place called Finningley, RAF Finningley, which was near Doncaster, east of England. And that was a V-bomber base, so I was going from fighters to bombers. And again, these were squadrons, and you're probably all aware of the V-bombers, the Vulcan, the Valiant and the Victor.
What was what would be the thing that you think was the best thing about being in the RAF during those 5 years?
Oh, well, it was all the things you learned. There was great discipline and camaraderie with all the guys, because everybody got the same whack of the stick type of thing. So you looked after each other. If something was going to go wrong, you teed each other up about it and put people on their guard, and so they wouldn't get caught out and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there was great camaraderie, but the discipline was quite good, and it taught us a lot about life. I worked for a company called Dexian for how long was I with them? For about 3 years. We had a great boss, and it was a small staff, and he looked after us really well. And when Christmas would come and Easter would come, we'd be the whole staff, which was about 22 staff, were taken for a weekend away and stuff like that. But the job itself was pretty good. And I don't know, now I'm just reflecting on back into Banbury days, export packing. That was a good job. I was in that for 9 years. Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, when I came out of the Air Force, I took on a job in a steelworks, and I was after having 5 years of fairly easy going type of work, and I mean sometimes it was hard but sometimes it wasn't, you know, and you had a lot of leisure time and stuff like that. So I come out after all of that, 5 years of that, taking on this job in a steelworks, and that would be in 1963. 63, 64 was when I came out of the airport, and I remember it was night. I had to do night work in this steel factory, and it was like it was slowly killing me because I wasn't used to all this heavy metal stuff and, you know, humping stuff around the place, and I ended up with I could hardly walk. I used to suffer with my feet really terrible because of all this heavy work, and I remember going to a chiropodist, and it was like when I finished in the chiropodist, it was like my feet were bathed in cotton wool. It was so, whatever he was after doing, you know. And my first memory of my dear wife was at a birthday party in a neighbour's house. That be right?
Yes.
Which we danced and did all the usual things at a party. Well, that's my first memory. So.
Yeah. Yes, I could say the same too. And I thought how handsome he was with his lovely black hair and
Oh yeah.
and red and black jumper like Elvis Presley. Yeah, no, that was good.
So,
and he sung a song for another girl
Called?
Anne O'Shea.
Called?
Called
What I say?
yeah,
Butterfingers.
Butterfingers. That's right. I couldn't-
How did that go?
Butterfingers,
I let you go,
but love still lingers. Why, I don't know. That's it.
And when did the romance start?
Oh, not for a long time after that. No, not for a long time. I would think about 6 years later than that. And one night we went to a dance in the Olympic, and Leo was there with our friend Arthur King, and he came over to me and took me up to dance. And we had good fun because he was a bit of a character at that time, bit of a laugh.
Not anymore.
And we danced all night to, I think it was Jimmy Honeyman Band and Dickie Rock and that. And he said, I'll take it.
Would you want me to take you home?
Yeah, and so we got a taxi home. So that was nice, and that was the beginning of the relationship.
I was home on leave from the RAF.
And then
That's how that happened. We met up, just went to a dance, and there we were.
And then it was Valentine's Day soon after, and I got my first ever Valentine's card from Leo, and I thought that was special.
I know, it was me, because you're not supposed to sign them, eh?
Well, you did sign it. And that was that. Yeah, from then on we kept in touch. And I went to live in Cheltenham with my friend Rita, who was Arthur's sister, and I was her bridesmaid. And I worked in Cheltenham, and Leo used to
Come down at weekends.
the weekends, and we'd all, the four of us, Basil and Rita and Leo and myself, might go to a dance, or we might, you know,
Go to a movie or whatever.
yeah. So that was it.
That was early
We
weekend
had good
stuff.
fun that time, yeah.
Okay. Prior to the arrangements for the wedding, I had a visit to Cheltenham, and I overstayed my welcome. Not overstayed my welcome, but overstayed
Your leave.
my leave, my weekend pass, thinking that if I went to a doctor, the doctor would cover me, and I just send a certificate back and I'd be covered. But I couldn't get one, so with the result I had then overstayed by 3 days, and eventually had to go back. And when I got back, the first thing that happened to me was I was brought in, because you have to report to the guard room. I was brought in and charged, put inside a cell, and told I had to go and see the commanding officer the next morning, and that's how it was. Went to the frog march to the commanding officer, and he gave me 7 days CB, which is confined to barracks, without any connection with any mates or wherever. I was on my own for that week, escorted by another member of the force,
Yeah.
and had to have my meals on my own with him. Had to anywhere I went, I had to have this escort. But that was 2 weeks before the wedding. 2 weeks before the wedding, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is not going right, and am I going to get out in time and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, I did get out, and I was able to make it back to Ireland for the wedding.
I had been back in Ireland for a few weeks before the wedding to organise everything with my family, and I thought, oh, it's funny, Leo's have no letters, no calls, no. Well, maybe he's changed his mind. So anyway, he hadn't. So we had a beautiful wedding.
Beautiful wedding, married in a local church, but our wedding reception was held in a castle, namely Clontarf Castle, which is on the north side of Dublin, and beautiful setting. And
we had 100 guests.
Yeah, 100 guests, and everything went well. We had a great day, and that evening we went off on our honeymoon, driving all over the west of west of Ireland.
Yeah.
And
Where did you go?
Well, we started off. Our first stop was Mullingar. Then our second stop was Athlone, and then we headed on over to Galway. Then up to Clare, and we basically drove all around the west, and
it was really lovely.
Beautiful honeymoon.
Went back
Through the RAF, we were able to. They found us a lovely apartment, which is a place called Retford, just outside of Doncaster, and we stayed there for till I actually finished in the RAF, which was about another year or so, was it?
Yes.
What was it like bringing up What was it like bringing up a young family in that time in the 1960s?
Oh, it was beautiful, because it was all new to us.
All new. We had a great time, although we didn't have family like around us, because we were in England, and most of the families were back in Ireland. We did have my sister and my brother who lived.
And then later, when we had our first baby, my mother came over, and my young sister, and Leo's sister and her husband, and twins. They had twins. They came down. So we were all together then when our first little boy was born, Graham. Beautiful memories of that time. Yeah, we used to take him to all these places where we still were with the Air Force, so we'd take him to watch, he was too young to watch the planes, but we would take him still to those places, the air shows, and we've some lovely photos of him at that time.
But we eventually ended up back in Ireland. In the meantime, Mary had fallen for Derek, so when we were in Ireland, she actually had Derek.
And before I got pregnant, I had a little evening job in Hughes Brothers packing the ice cream, and The supervisor I got to know very well, and she said to me, "Oh, would you be any relation to Maureen Tighe?" And I said, "Yes, she's my mother-in-law." "Oh, she was my pal," and so on, so on. And I told her the story of Leo still being in England, and I was staying with my mother. So she said, "Oh," she came back to me one day and said, "Oh, there's a job going," she said, working on with the ice cream, delivering to the shops. And I said, "Oh, that would be great for my husband." Anyway,
So
he came home and had the interview and got the job. And that was a start. And we stayed with my mother for a little while till we got a flat on Leinster Road in Rathmines. And Derek was born while we were there. And we had a beautiful flat, and I think the people were Jehovah's Witnesses who owned the house, but they were very good to us. And
so when the time came for me to finish with the ice cream, because it was a seasonal job, they told us from the beginning that once it's over, then you're out of work. We wouldn't have a job. But when it ended, I was offered a job on a milk run.
What was it like being the milkman?
Well, it was, you know, you just learned a few songs and you sang them in the 3 o'clock in the morning, delivering the milk, and as quietly as you can. And yeah, it was pretty good. But in those days, although they were just phasing them out when I was there, being a relief man, I had 3 runs to cover. But 2 of the runs were horse runs. They were still using horses at that time. Although, as I said, phasing them out, bringing in the electric van, you know, for deliveries. And yeah, well, that was it. I was a bit daft for how long was I there? Must have been about 2 years, was it?
yeah, about
So does that mean Derek's father on his birth certificate says milkman?
Milkman?
Yes,
Probably,
yes.
yeah. And after 2 years, we weren't making much progress, and nothing great was happening to us, so we decided we'd go back to England. And we moved back to Banbury in Oxfordshire.
What year was that?
That would be about 1965. About 65. And
Why Banbury?
through a friend of, well, through the girl who Mary grew up with. Her name was Anne. She was married to this lad Kevin, and they had come over for a holiday while we were in Ireland, and encouraged us to go to England, because they thought I could get into the particular job that Kevin was in British Leyland Motor Company. And so after some weeks or months maybe of thinking about it, we decided we'd do it. So that's where we headed back to.
And we went and stayed around Kevin in Middleton Cheney in Banbury. But we eventually got a place of our own, a little flat in Banbury.
That's right, I got into a job outside of Banbury, a place called Chipping Warden. And it was a disused airfield, which still had its hangars up and so forth, and this company were packing motor cars and jeeps and Land Rovers and stuff to send out to places like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and that's what I did it for nearly 9 years, packing these big cars, but in breakdown form. Which was a great job, because we worked on a bonus system, which the harder you worked, the more money you got, and we
always
really well.
earned a lot of money.
Earned a lot of money. So much so at one stage, because you worked as a team, 2 guys working together, and as you'd done each crate, and you signed it off in a little book, and then at the end of the week you compared that book with the office people, and once everything was okay, you got paid. But we were doing so well at one stage that they came down to investigate us. They thought that we were fiddling, but it wasn't a fiddle at all. We were just working hard and getting on with it, you know.
Hill. So tell us about what Bretch Hill was like
Well,
and,
what
with a young
happened-
family.
Yeah, what happened was when we were in the flat, I went to the priest one day for a reference to rent a house. And he said to me, why would you do that? He said, we have special flat, so and they saved so much money, so we did that. And saved up enough money to buy a
Deposit
to
for
put
a
a
house.
deposit on a house.
Yeah.
But when the time came, we decided we'd buy a Mini with the $200 that we had saved. Anyway, that was that. So
In the
then,
meantime, we had put her name down on the council list.
yes, and
we-
then we had our little boy, our youngest boy, Aaron.
Isn't it?
And we got a maisonette, and which was lovely, beautiful, and we settled in there, and Aaron was born, and
So the council then gave us a house.
yeah, we got a
We
council.
got a 3-bedroomed house. And that was on the same road, Bretch Hill Road, but further up, and a lovely corner house. And we were there for what?
Oh, we were there for
7 years, 8 years?
8 years.
Yeah.
What was it like living in that house in that area, the green and
We
all that area?
lo-
When we moved to this house, the corner house, we had, it was a lovely little area. We had a green, which was just outside of a grass green with just 1, 2 trees, was it? A couple of trees in it. And we...
Houses facing us.
yeah, it was a square, but it was all green. And we, as the boys grew up, they were playing their sports and whatnot.
Well, we had very good friends, lived on the next corner house. There was 4 houses in the block. We were on one end, and our friends Madeline and Jimmy Primrose. 'Cause Madeline used to spoil them. They'd sit on front of the television with a drink and a sandwich or something, and they'd watch a movie, and they loved each other. They were like family. And of course, and there was Madeline had Karen and
Grown children.
James and David, and they were lovely children. And they were like family to us while we lived there.
So then there was a short stint in Morris Drive. So what was what
Yeah.
happened there? Why
Well,
did
when
this
we
happen?
decided, when we were able to afford to be able to put a deposit down on a house, we did so, and within a period of probably 6 months or so, we saw this house, which we thought we would like, and went for it. And it was a place called Morris Drive. Lovely house. And we were both working. We were both working in the same company, General Foods. Boys were all at school, so
We had previously bought a caravan, which we used to go away to Cornwall and that for summer holidays, which was great. So then we decided we'd sell the caravan, and with our bit of savings and the money from the caravan, we could have a deposit for a house. So we did that.
So we stayed in Morris Drive for approximately
Only
what,
2 years.
2 years, because we always had this. Well, I always say this. We always had this hankering that if we had what we have there back home in Ireland, it would be great.
We had a lovely house, and in a nice area,
Lovely,
and
lovely.
near the mountains, and Tala, and but I have to say it took me a long time to settle back, even though my parents were there and my sisters and all. I missed Banbury so much.
And we used to go up the mountains a lot. We used to drive up the mountains and go up to
Paris Court.
Powers Court, yeah, which was in Wicklow, but we used to drive over the Dublin mountains to get there. We used to go up to a place called Sally Gap, or past Sally Gap, and we used to have great times up there.
There was water.
It was all natural waterfalls that you could play around with and just do what people normally do.
And we'd take a
in the open.
picnic.
We take picnics, and
That was nice.
sometimes we'd meet up with family and meet them up there, and yeah, we used to have some good times. We made our move to Luton, set up home there, and we were only going to save for a couple of years to get Aaron on his feet and make sure everything was right, but we ended up staying, I think it was 6 years.
So from Luton, you went back to Ireland for a few years?
Okay,
Yes.
from Luton, when our time was almost finished in Luton, Aaron was old enough to be able to look after himself. He'd met his lovely wife in the meantime, Julie, and we were happy about that, so we decided we'd go back to Dublin. But as I was going back, I didn't have a job to go back to. We thought we'll take a bit of a holiday, because in the meantime, over those few years we were in Luton, Graham had moved to Australia.
And by that time, Derek was married and had a little girl.
Yeah, that's right.
She was almost 7. And then eventually, when they came out,
No,
she was 7, and
We'd taken our second holiday, and then when we went back to Dublin, carried on with the job, and then Derek and Judith and Jenny came out to emigrate to Australia. So we were back in Dublin then. The boys were all away, and we decided, well, what we're going to do is we're going to try and emigrate, and so we needed to apply and make the application for emigration and so forth, not thinking that we would get accepted, but we did. And within the space of about 7 months from receiving the visa, we came out to Australia, which was in January of 95.
Wow. What's been one of the great adventures for you of living in Australia?
well, firstly, being near my children, because I didn't want to live away from them. And Leo was lucky enough to get a job which took us all over the northwest of Australia, and we've seen places that even some Australians haven't seen, and that was really good. We lived in a place called Karratha, up north, the northwest, and that was in the middle of his working space run or whatever, and so we travelled a lot. And on a morning when we would say maybe go to Broome, we would be up, leave the house at 6 o'clock, and we'd head off on the road to Broome, stopping off in Port Hedland, and then in a small place called Sandfire, which we would just fuel up and carry on. That was a huge experience, driving along those roads. Even me having a little drive in between to give Leo a rest was a great experience, and it was something you would never forget, and everyone doesn't get the chance to do.
Dad, what would be of that time, of that adventure, what would be one or two of your favourite moments?
Favourite moment? Well, actually, I wouldn't call it favourite, but experiences, because the weather being as it is in the northwest can be beautiful at one time and can be terrible at another time. And one experience we had was we were heading up to Broome, which is an 8-hour drive from Karratha, but we'd gone through the Sandfire place, carried on up, and as we were heading towards, we saw this magnificent bad weather. It was just a storm coming in across, and the lightning, and it was like
An electric storm.
yeah, it was like beautiful, wasn't it?
But
Beautiful.
it was beautiful.
But another scary. We had to pull over. The rain got so heavy we couldn't see, and we had to wait till it subsided a bit to carry on. But anyway, another occasion was, and it was on the same stretch of road. We ran into a swarm of locusts, and these locusts were just like a blanket of locusts on front of us, all on the road, and the vegetation either side of the road. And it was like, when you looked at it as we were driving along, it was like the road was moving. There was so many, there was millions of them, and of course the front of the car just got wiped out in terms of dead locusts and so forth. And that's how we arrived in Broome on that particular occasion. And the first place I had to go to a garage so they could wash all these dead locusts off. It was that bad, it really was.
And the other little things were the cows asleep on the road.
Oh yeah,
and things like that.
These just experiences when you're doing all that kind of driving.
Yeah.
But places that we used to visit, there was a place called 80 Mile Beach, which is way up north, and that was absolutely fabulous. We just drove down.
Yeah.
There was a big caravan site there. We just pulled in by the and we thought, oh, we can drive out onto the beach. So we drove out onto the beach, stripped off and into the sea, had a swim, got back into the car and headed off again. Another place called near Carnarvon was the blowholes.
Yes.
We had we decided we'd go and have a look at these blowholes, and they were unbelievable. The tides coming in and
nature
shoot up into the air with
really good.
a geyser of water, great.
What's your definition of happiness?
Happiness for me is peace of mind. I love my home, my comfort, and I try not to be with people who are not nice.
Happiness? Oh, probably loving the person you married.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, loving the job that you're doing. Because if you love a job that you're doing, that makes you happy.
Yeah. What accomplishment are you most proud of?
Being a mother and a housewife, and I live for my children and my husband, and now of course my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, yeah.
Most proud of?
I think my most accomplishment moment, or it wouldn't be moments, it was rearing a family. Rearing 3 boys that to this day I'm very proud of.
When you get to the pearly gates and St. Peter meets you, what will you say to him?
I would say, oh yes, now I hope all my family are there waiting to greet me, because that's what I'd love.
Peter comes to see you at the pearly gates. What would you say to him?
A new room inside. Oh my God.
If you could possess one superpower, what would it be?
One superpower. knowing what the other person's thinking. How about that?
Very good, very good. I like that.
It's a superpower, isn't it?
That is.
What's that?
What's your favourite sound?
Sound? Oh. I love the birds singing.
What's your least favourite sound?
Least favourite. Loud television is my least favourite.
What? Very good. What is your favourite sound?
Sound. My wife saying, dinner's ready. That good?
What is your least favourite sound?
Sorry, love, I haven't got any more dinner left.
If you could be anyone in history,
Oh, in history.
a historic figure, who would it be?
John F. Kennedy.
Can you remember where you were when he died?
Yep. I was in the Air Force, and I was coming home to my wife, which was a sort of a regular thing every day. Finished at 4:30, grab a bus, get off at the bus stop, and run down the street in my uniform. And when I got into the house, my wife had dinner ready. We sat down, put the television on, and there it was. It was all over the TV. John F. Kennedy's been assassinated. That is a big memory.
Can you remember where you were when man landed on the moon?
Yes. We were living in a place called Banbury in Oxfordshire, and we were living in a maisonette, and we were expecting our third child, and it was getting close to birthing time and landing on the moon. We were hoping that the birth would happen at the same time that man would land on the moon, but it actually happened 10 days before. But I remember sitting up watching the landing of the moon on the 21st of July 1969.
What is your secret to 52 years of marriage?
I think you've got to be tolerant, and you've also got to give and take and share. Be fair with each other, and everybody has ups and downs, but you have got to care about each other and consider the other person if you want to do anything, you know. And I think that's what gets you through.
Thank you. Dad, what would be, if you were giving advice to a young man, what would you say are keys to success for that young man in his life? Or lady. Sorry.
What can I say? I think the best thing for any young man today is to have discipline in themselves. When they go out into the world to work, to have a good work ethic, to listen to people people who have had experience of life, and to take note of what they're saying. I don't think any young man or young woman can go wrong if they adopt those things I've just mentioned. You gotta give a little, take a little,
let your heart
heart break a little. That's the story of, that's the glory of love.
You've got